So welcome to Malibu. Just pretend, all right? Listen, you can hear the surf. And let me bring in Dudley Chancey, who flew all the way here, sort of, from Oklahoma, where he serves at Oklahoma Christian University. Dudley has been there teaching for more than 2 decades, teaching youth ministry and family ministry. Dudley also is the guy who oversees that little thing called Winterfest. There is nobody I know who has more energy and passion for youth ministry. Dudley, thank you for being here. Hey, what's it like in youth ministry in Oklahoma right now?
We just started going back to church the 1st of October, so we have people in our auditorium. It's an overflow into our old auditorium and an overflow into our gym. People want to come back to church. That's good news.
That's wonderful. And is it masks required? How are you guys handling that issue?
Yes.
I heard somebody say the other day they want to join Paul on the road to Damascus. So that's your bad dad joke for the morning. Dudley, how did you get intrigued by, or what drew you into the research you've done on LGBTQ issues?
Well, this particular chapter in this book that just came out was a conference that I've been a part of for 20 or 30 years, the Groves Conference on Marriage and Family.
Yep.
And we met, it may have been in California a couple of years ago, and that was our theme for that week, about gender and sexuality and politics and things like that. And most of those folks, this is a secular organization, but they know I'm a minister and teach ministry. And so I get to do any praying that happens or any devotionals that happen, which are rare, but if they need something religious, I'm their boy.
Yeah.
And so they said, tell us what's happening in the church. And so I did these interviews and wrote that chapter.
Were the interviews heartbreaking?
There's some good stories and there's some terrible stories. I would hate to be some of those people and face God.
Well, how many in total did you end up interviewing? Just having a big round number. What's your guess?
I did 25 qualitative interviews.
Okay. With students who identified or had, quote, come out as LGBTQ. Is that fair?
Some, and then some adults around the country. Vicki and I flew to several places and interviewed some people that if I told you who they were, you would freak out.
Okay. All right.
In our fellowship.
Okay. So with that kind of scary intro, I'll just launch it to you with this. I will admit that I grew up absolutely homophobic. I was just, in elementary school, high school, that was the worst thing you could call somebody. Flip the script, and I am here trying to say, oh, how do we do compassion without compromise? How do we love like Jesus without giving up what we believe? And then I hear horror stories of hurting teens. How do we be Jesus? So if you'll answer that for us, man, we'll be extremely grateful. It's all yours, bro.
Okay. For my first hour, I want to talk about a couple of things. I do want to say this before I start out. This population is very, very, very small, and yet it gets all the headlines. It's amazing. And what we know about teenagers, the whole identity, autonomy, belonging that they're trying to accomplish.
Right.
When you highlight a group of people, especially around adolescents, the suicide thing, the copycat shootings, all these things. We just went through a deal at one of our high schools. A kid died and people wanted to name a room or a hallway after him. And the school policy here is we don't do that, because a kid sees that and goes, oh, wow, how do I get recognition? I die and they put my name on the wall, kind of deal. And so I'm teaching a class on social media and adolescence this semester, and one of the things that we are finding in the research and all is that teens are looking for that place to belong and to be known. And when these things get highlighted, they have a tendency to go, oh, wow, maybe if I be gay, I'll get recognition. Or maybe if I talk about hurting myself, I'll get recognition. I had a kid last year tell me he tried to drive his car into a bridge to kill himself so that Oklahoma Christian would have a funeral for him. I mean, and because some kid had died, the two girls at Harding that won him, and there was so much about it. This is a nobody kind of kid, and he's like, wow, maybe if that happened to me, people would know me. I'd be dead, but they would know me. Anyway, Jeff took half of my time, so let me run through some of this quickly. And Jeff, you just say stop, and I'll stop. I want to tell you, in one of the handouts that I gave that you guys can have access to, there's a new book. It's coming out. I just did a review for it for Baker Publishing. Actually, one of the authors is a Church of Christ lady, counselor, Beth Robinson, Dr. Robinson. And she and another lady wrote a book called Talking to Teens About Sex. There's 2 chapters in that book that specifically have to do what this topic is about today. One of those chapters is disorienting sexuality, and the other one is understanding gender issues. Probably worth the price of the book. But one of the interesting things about this book is they don't just talk about it and throw stats or whatever. They say, here's how you can help parents help their kids. Because after all, it's not your responsibility to spiritually form teenagers. I'm just going to go on record saying that. It's the parents' responsibility. If you're not spending part of your time as a youth minister training parents, equipping parents to spiritually form their own children, we're just keeping this cycle going of babysitting. And I can say that. I did youth ministry 25 years, and I'm guilty of some of that stuff too. But I tell my students, 30% of your time with teens, 30 with parents, and 30 training volunteers, 10% in the office. If we could get more to that model, I think we would see more results. But one of the things about that book, talking to your teens about, is she gives you concrete advice and examples of how to talk and have that talk with your teen. I mean, if your teen walked up to you, Jeff, I grew up like you. My scariest thing when I had 2 sons that I never told anybody was that one day they might be gay. It was built into me, and I thought that's got to be the worst thing ever that could ever in the world happen to you. Not that they might go to hell or something, but just that they would be gay. I'm like you. I have turned the corner on that, and anyway, grew up in that. So I would tell you this book will probably be out in January or sometime. It'd be worth a read for you to get that book, and it's on that list. I think it's on Dudley's list that you'll get if Pepperdine's on their game and gets it all out to you there. Let me just do a little bit from the research. This was 25 people that I sat down. The interesting thing, the students at Oklahoma Christian, these were freshmen and sophomores, a couple of seniors, they would not talk to me on campus. And so my wife and I did 2 meals. We had 2 different groups over, kind of focus group, whatever you want to call it, but I just called it, hey, I want to talk with you guys. And these folks came to our house, and a couple of times we stayed up till 2 or 3 in the morning sitting around a fire outside of them telling their stories. And a couple of good stories, but then a lot of bad stories about how they were treated in their youth groups when people found out that they were gay, or they came out and said they were gay or whatever. I remember one night we were sitting at our table and we had just finished eating, and this one girl reached over. There were about 4 of them that wouldn't tell me their names. I knew they were students at OC, but they just were so scared that somebody would find out and kick them out of school or whatever. Not that that would happen at our school. But anyway, she just reached over and told me, she said, I don't know why you're helping us or concerned. If they find out you're helping us, they'll fire you. And I thought, they're not going to fire me. However, I found out a person that I interviewed later on, Vicki and I sat in a restaurant for 6 hours talking to a couple, two females that are married. They got kicked out of their Church of Christ. And also one of them worked for one of our Christian universities. And when the powers that be found out that they had gotten married, they basically went to him and said, you're fired. We're going to give you a lot of money, but you can't talk. You can't tell people why you were fired, blah, blah, but you can't work here. And that's, I can understand that a little bit from a business kind of thing, which most of our schools are. But churches are another thing. I interviewed two ladies, and they have video. They actually showed me the video. Each Sunday, they go to the church that they grew up in. They both got married to men. That didn't go well later on. They came back home, went back to their church where both of their sets of parents go. They met each other again, blah, 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 and they end up in this relationship and get married. They've adopted 3 or 4 kids, doing great. But think about this. Every Sunday, they go to this church, one of our churches, and when they walk into the door, one of the elders there runs to them and tells them to get out of their church. They don't want your kind here, blah, 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 and just blast them. They let him have his little deal, and then they go sit with their parents. They actually showed me video of this guy blasting them, telling them to get the blank out of their church. This is an elder. So wherever you fall on the spectrum of it's a sin, they're going to hell, I tell people one of the greatest Winterfest ever in my mind was Elemental Living, L1, L2. If you ask our 2 boys what's the most important thing in life, they will tell you L1, L2. I suck at both of those. I love God. I'm trying to love him more. I love some people. I'm supposed to love them all, I hear, but I'm working on it. And so what I tell churches when I go and do these things and they talk about, well, can we let them in or whatever, I tell them, Jesus said, love God, love others. Everything else hangs on these 2 things. And I'm thinking whatever group of people, blue, green, purple, orange, black, white, they fall into that others category. And so I got to figure out how to love them. And once again, as Jeff and I were talking earlier, there's liars and there's cheaters and there's murderers and all that. So pick whatever your big sin is, and whatever you want to hate and or not like or have a soapbox on, and you get on those things and you can go for it. But I have to love those people, and so I'm figuring out how do I love them and accept them, and then show them this is the way, the truth, and the life. That's the big challenge. So some history here real quick. How many of you, I should have done a poll question. Most everybody thinks gay church or whatever started in California. If you put that answer down, you'd be wrong. So our poll might say, where do you think the first gay church was? Anybody got a clue? I will tell you this
Was it Texas?
Minneapolis, wasn't it? Metro, or Minneapolis?
Or was it Houston?
I just want to be proud and say the first gay church was in Atlanta, Georgia in 1946.
I thought it was Corinth.
I've been to Corinth. That one's not there anymore. Anyway, Atlanta, Georgia, 1946. And if you read my chapter, you can get the details on that or whatever. And one of the things that we talk about is well, let's just have all gay churches and the gay people can go to their church and to be out of sight, out of mind. And that doesn't fix things. There are a lot of people that do that, but it doesn't fix the idea that we're supposed to love others. Also, let me say a little bit about conversion therapy. Most counselors and psychologists, whatever, that's not a good thing. I think you can lose your license for doing conversion therapy now or whatever. The new conversion therapy, by the way, is celibacy. So a lot of us in the churches would try to put that on to our gay friends or gay people or whatever. And so that'd be another thing that you might want to talk about or whatever. Mostly the thing that's wrong with all of our churches is it's not who's in them or whatever, but it's what's in our hearts. That's kind of what's wrong with our churches. That's a whole nother lesson. Talked about the sample real quick. They were 25 different, from students to some older people in our churches that I accidentally found out. I think there's, at least for one of these people, there may be 3 people in the world that know. And I slipped up on it in an interview with another person that actually let it slip out. But my wife and I got on an airplane and flew to that person and spent a day with them. Fascinating kind of deals. In the chapter I wrote, there's a lot about African Americans in there and about their churches. There's a quote here. When we think it's bad and Black Lives Matter and all that stuff that's going on in our country, listen to this quote. This is by an African American preacher. And he says this. This was in the New York Times. If the KKK opposes gay marriage, I would ride with them. And that's how adamant they are about, wow, we don't like gay people in our churches, whatever. Several observations that I found. I'm just going to do them real quick, and I'll read a couple of things from some people, and then we can do some questions or whatever. Observation 1 was the fear of victimization doesn't change from middle school till old people. Vicki and I interviewed a couple of people that they would not come to our house. And so we met them in a restaurant. We sat in that restaurant 6 hours talking to them about their church experience. They had been kicked out of their church. And when we were leaving, walking out in the parking lot, one of them said, hey, if you ever invite us to your house, we'll come. And I said, well, I invited you this time. And they said, yeah, but the last 2 times church people invited us to their house, the elders were there when we got there and they jumped us. And so we don't know you from Adam. And that's why we wanted to meet in a public place. So there's still victimization no matter what your age is, kind of deal there. I emailed 7 of our biggest churches in Churches of Christ in the country and asked them what their policy was about could gay people come to their church. And 3 of them actually sent me an email back. The other 4 did not respond. But the 3 said, we have a don't ask, don't tell policy. So that'll tell you something there. Second observation, how long before churches really start doing what the Bible says about loving people? Out of those 25 people, probably 20 of them asked that question about, are we really going to be the church? That kind of deal. Third observation, do LGBT communities think about self-harm, suicide, death more than straight communities? The answer is yes. 2 of the 25 people that I interviewed had attempted suicide. Several of the younger participants had discussed suicidal thoughts after they came out and kind of got blasted. One person said, I came out, he got all of his buddies together. This was at a Christian university and not near here. And he said, I told them that I was gay and I'm coming out. Every one of them told him, hey, you're not our friend anymore. And he said, I didn't actually think about doing anything then, but I remember thinking to myself, this is why people kill themselves. So not a really good thought there. One participant said, I never thought about killing myself, but I would pray to God almost every day to let me die. A heart attack, a car wreck, or just run over me by a truck. It didn't matter. Just relieve the pain, the loneliness, and the rejection. Another person said, when I was in college, I came to a breaking point. I was doing all the ex-gay therapy. He was involved in Exodus. If some of you know what that is, it is no more. And he said, I was so tired of digging up every root cause for my sexuality, and I just wanted to die. I really wanted to die. There were times I contemplated suicide, which made me feel even more guilty, and I just wanted to die. A fourth observation is, does celibacy work for some in the LGBT communities? 3 of the people out of the 25 present gay and lesbian, and they said, but we don't practice that lifestyle. And some of you may have read, there's a lady in our fellowship, Sally Gary, that wrote a book, Loves Girls, or Likes Girls, Loves God kind of deal. These people were kind of that same category. And oddly enough, they were also the ones that were still very involved in their Church of Christ. One of them is the treasurer at their church. One of them is a song leader. And believe it or not, one of them, a male, is in charge of their children's ministry. Now, most churches would die if they knew that this perverted person is running our children's ministry. But I actually did some checking up on that later, and this guy's like a saint, and people love him. And I mean, that's great. Another observation, there are people in the LGBT communities that are very spiritual, and that's so. Out of the 25, only one quit going to church, and they said this. I had questions about, this is as a teenager, so you guys listen up. You got to figure out how to talk about this, as well as every other kind of topic. But this guy says, I had questions about God, the earth, sex, and me. No one at my church ever tried to help me find answers, even when I asked. One participant wanted to be a missionary, and when people found out about it in his church and at his school, they kicked him out of the program. I've actually heard this person preach in another language, and they knock it out of the park, and then they were told they can't be a missionary and tell people about Jesus. I asked people why they keep going to church. Most of these people grew up in churches of Christ. Only about 3 of the 25 are still going to a Church of Christ. But they said this, why do I stay involved in church? All my friends are there. I want to make a difference with God's people, so I need to be a part of that to do it. It's about my relationship with God. It's the right thing to do. And I love this one. We want our adopted children to be brought up in church. I was taught that going to church is the thing to do when young, and now I own it for myself. Several said, I love God. I want to be a part of the church. I wish I could be part of the one I grew up in. My sense of faith community will never go away. I grew up living by a set of principles. This person says, at first I was angry at God, but not anymore. I go because I believe in God and I love God. I can see God more clearly now than when I was in high school. Loves God, loves Jesus, loves people.
Mm-hmm.
A 6th observation says, being spiritually involved in the church did not and does not come without a struggle. One person said, the first fight's with yourself, and then the fight with the church to keep your faith. Most of the participants had to find a new church to go to. This is sad. One person describes his church and says this, it's sort of a concert instead of a worship experience. I miss the a cappella singing. No one does that better than us. Another person told me they had found an Anglican church that was very inclusive, but they could not do ministry there because they were not ordained. I used to lead worship, lead mission trips, and teach. Now I just go with my partner and we sit, we listen, and we go home.
Wow. Dudley, the quotes that you're reading here, are all those included in that chapter of the
Yes.
book? And can
Yes.
you give us the title of the book just so we
It's
can get
on
that in the
the-
chat line
It's on the
on the document? Can you give it to us anyway? What's the title of the book?
the title of the book is Can you see it? And I'll type it in. I'll type it in just a second.
Well, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll send that document out to everybody. Let me ping you with one last question.
All right.
I've got to believe there's some guys and gals on this call who are saying, "Oh my word! I know this is real, but our shepherds are gonna freak out if I do anything other than homosexuality is a sin." Next question. What advice would you give to them?
I would advise you to read Dr. Robinson's book. It's very biblical. It actually probably made me a little uncomfortable in the sense it was too biblical. If you can be too biblical, in the sense that I'm probably a little more to the left, maybe, with this group of people because of just spending so much time with them and feeling the rejection, and then watching people on a campus very near here, I won't say where it's at, treat these people like they're not people. Now, let me say this. If your teenagers see that happening and seeing these people, they have more of a tendency to lean and save everybody and save the gay people, save the black people, save the whales, save whatever they're trying to save, because I think God puts that in us. That's the image of God coming out, to care for people, to care for marginalized people. These are people in the margins. Mm-hmm. And I think that's who Jesus would have hung out with. In fact, he gets blasted for hanging out with those kind of people, although he never mentions a gay person or whatever. I think he probably hung out with some of those people. I think it's the L1, L2 thing that you sit with your leadership and say, I hope you dislike liars and thieves and rapists and adulterers as much as you don't like gay people. What do we do with all these? Because if you do that and you stay with that kind of thinking, there'd be we don't need masks because there'd be nobody in your church. We would all have to leave because we, as Sandra Riker says in the Epic of Eden, don't ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Number one, there are no good people. We're all sinners and fall short and all that good stuff, and we live in a broken world. So I mean, I would also tell youth ministers, especially young ones that have no validity at your church, you walk into your elders and say, hey, I put a rainbow sign up in my youth group. Everybody's welcome. You probably, I would fire you. So think through what you're thinking about and talking about, learn how to talk about it. Mm-hmm. One of the things that this chapter on understanding gender issues in Dr. Robinson's book, it's got terms and things like that most of us that talk about these things don't even know what the terms are. And as this right here, there's a link to this. This whole issue of National Geographic was about the 48 genders. This was 2017. I think there's 64 now. So this thing it's a moving target. And once again, we could spend all our time with 2% of the population, and we leave all these other kids that are coming to our group. We forget about evangelism. We forget about sharing. We forget about being Christ to 98% of our group, just so we can go get fired for caring about 2% of them. I'm just saying, be careful, know your stuff, and just start. I mean, whoever your elder is, that is your elder at your church. I mean, if you've got a kid or kids are coming or want to come, somebody there needs to be having the conversation so that you don't get killed when it comes down. Because if enough of your people in your church don't